Two chords.
If you've got a Bible and you find it helpful, please turn in it to Deuteronomy chapter 34. This is where we will be spending our time today. This is an interesting text, and it has one element of it that, as we get into it, I think you'll see why I found it confusing all my life as a believer. Maybe it's not confusing at all to you. It has been for me. Moses is said to be in the scripture the greatest of the prophets. Other than Jesus, he's the greatest of the prophets. Jesus was seen as a prophet when he walked the earth by the people who followed him. But he's not allowed, Moses is not allowed to go into the promised land. After leading the Jews for all those 40 years plus, he's not allowed to enter the land that God had set aside for the Jewish nation. And so we're going to look today at what those reasons would be and what things we could learn from Moses' life. I'll begin reading in verse 1 of chapter 34 of Deuteronomy, if you want to follow along. Moses ascended from the deserts of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the summit of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. The Lord showed him the whole land from Gilead to Dan, and all of Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, the land of Judah, as far as the distant sea, the Negev, the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of the date palm trees, as far as Zoar. Then the Lord said to Moses, "This is the land I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said I'll give it to your descendants. I've let you see it, but you will not cross over and go in there." So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, just as the Lord had said. God buried him in the land of Moab near Beth Peor, but no one knows exactly the burial place of Moses to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died, but his eye was not dull, nor had his vitality departed him. The Israelites mourned for Moses in the deserts of the Moab for 30 days. Then the days of mourning for Moses ended. Now Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had placed his hands on him, and the Israelites listened to Joshua and did just what the Lord had commanded Moses. No prophet ever arose again in Israel like Moses, who knew the Lord face to face. Moses did all the signs and the wonders that the Lord had sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and all of Pharaoh's servants and the whole land. And Moses displayed great power and awesome might in all of the view of Israel. So Moses is at the crossroads of his life, and he's told the people this. This is not something they didn't expect. If you go back and read Deuteronomy several chapters back, beginning in chapter 31, you'll see that this was all known. That Moses knew for a long time that he was not going to enter the land, and that he was going to die before they did enter the land. And Moses warned the people. This is why he handpicked Joshua to be his successor, laying hands on him. And think about the history that I say poor Moses because that's how it's always struck me. Think about the history that Moses has with the Lord. He's called to be their deliverer. I mean, you know the story. He's put in the basket. Pharaoh's daughter finds him floating in the river Nile. She takes him home to raise him. He's raised in the palace of Pharaoh. There are scholars, ancient Near Eastern scholars, who believe that Moses would have been a Pharaoh, but potentially, even though he was a Hebrew, because he was educated in all of the Egyptian educational system, raised in that palace. And then, of course, he kills an Egyptian when he sees how the Jews are being mistreated, and he has to flee. He flees to Midian. You know, it's a 250-mile journey from Midian, Egypt to Midian. I mean, this just wasn't some little place next door that he went. All the way across the Sinai Peninsula, he fled. He winds up in Midian, and he raises goats and sheep for 40 years. He spent 40 years in Midian raising sheep, leaving a palace to go to the desert, which I found very interesting. So in Moses' life, you can see this trajectory. And then in Numbers chapter 20, if you want to go back and read what happened to Moses that caused him to be barred from entering the promised land, you can read it there. They were thirsty. They're traveling in the desert. You know, it makes good sense to me that, hey, where's the water coming from, Moses? And Moses is the one they look to for everything. Well, the grumbling had gone on, and Moses had just had enough of it. and he became angry, and he struck the rock with his rod, and the water came out. I have always, up until this week even, looking at the text and trying to figure out what was the big deal here. Why did God punish Moses in this severe way by saying, I'm going to let you climb up a mountain and look over it in a nice land that you've been leading everybody to, but you're not going in yourself. I thought, wow, 40 years, man. It seemed like he might have earned the gig, to go on in there. It just makes no sense to me. But even in the innocence of this event, there's a serious, serious thing that happens between Moses and the people that really has to be explained just a little bit. You see, it was Moses' attitude when he struck the rock. That's what got him in trouble. The rod that God had given him he'd empowered Moses to use that rod for all sorts of things. And no doubt, when it came time for the Jews to have water, Moses would have probably touched a rock and given them water, or whatever God intended to do. God gives them the water, which shows you that God wanted them to have the water. He didn't want to keep them thirsty. But from the people's point of view, who brought them the water? Moses. Moses brought them the water, not God. So this is why this is so serious. It's that all of the focus for bringing the water to the Jews was on Moses, not God. And what Moses had inadvertently done is he had robbed the people of a chance to see God's compassion for them. Now, think for just a minute what that would mean. Think about it in our own lives when we see somebody say something to somebody in our family, maybe as children we were raised this way, who knows, wherein God's compassion is not seen, but something harsh is seen in connection with God. Our perspective about who God is gets changed. And it's sometimes very hard for people to let go of some of those things, even as adults. So Moses had robbed the whole nation of seeing God's compassion and being drawn near to God by doing what he did. It was a serious thing. God's opportunity, which is what this was all about, was to show his compassion. Here was the opportunity, bringing the people water, and Moses took that away from God and made the focus him. So they're drawn to Moses in a way that's not good, not healthy at all. And so God is very severe with Moses. In Deuteronomy chapter 3, I'll read this for you. You don't have to look there unless you wish, but Moses has a conversation with God and the people all mingled together here, and he says this, "Moreover, at that time," Moses says, "I pleaded with the Lord, O Lord, you've begun to show me your greatness and strength. What God in heaven and earth can rival your works and your mighty deeds? None. So let me please cross over to see the good land on the other side of the Jordan River, this good hill country in Lebanon. But the Lord was angry at me because of you." The people. Now think about this for just a minute. We're going to unpack this a little. The Lord was angry at me, Moses says, because of you, the people, and would not listen to me. And instead the Lord said to me, "Enough of that. Do not speak to me about this matter anymore. Go up to the top of Mount Pisgah. Take a good look to the west, east, north, and south. You will not cross the River Jordan and go into the land." Now this seems incredibly harsh to me. But look at Moses in the text. What does he say? I did it because of you, not because of Moses. He did it because he was frustrated with the people. You see, at this point in Moses' trajectory, there's still a great flaw there in Moses. He's blaming the people for the fact that he struck the rock. So it makes a lot of sense that God would say, sorry, Moses, you've been a good boy most of the time, but this was serious. This was very serious. I quoted it last week. It's a great epigram. It says, sanctification requires consecration without reservation. And that is true. And Moses was reserved. He's still blaming the people for what he did. You made me so mad that I struck the rock, and look at what's happened to me now. This introduces a really difficult precept, I think, for us as believers into our lives. And think about this now. think hard about this. I do. I'll tell you right now, this is something I think about, and I'm saying this honestly every night as I'm falling asleep. And that's true. What things in our lives have we done through our lives that have eliminated God's being able to use us permanently? Permanently. I mean, we've seen it, right? We've seen large ministries rise up, and then we've seen the person fall because of something very serious, and we'll never hear of them again in ministry, really, to any consequence. They've been removed permanently by God. They may get on TV and they may say things, but I promise you, God is not interested in having people, when they've fallen like that, be used again in that public way. So what ways have we perhaps damaged ourselves to a lesser use? I think about this every night of my life. There's a painting in Rochester, New York. I used to travel up there a lot. The sickest I've ever got on the road was in Rochester. Oh. I was so sick that I was sick on my stomach. And I was sitting in the passenger seat of our vehicle, and the guy, my other member of the band, was driving. We were at a major intersection in Rochester, and I saw a restaurant over there. And I thought, I'm going to go in there, because if I don't get in there in the next 30 seconds, there's going to be a mess in the truck here. And so in the middle of this intersection, have you ever been in a situation where you were running a fever or something like that, and you got so sick that you started to see yellow spots come in front of your eyes and you're fixing to pass out? That's what I saw. And I was pulling the door handle to get out of the truck in the middle of traffic, because I was going in there no matter what. And I just remember hearing the guy say, and grab my arm and say, "You can't get out here. We're in the middle of the 4-lane highway here. You can't get out." So that's how I remember Rochester. That's a whole side story just to tell you. That's my memory of Rochester, New York.
No Kodak.
There's a painting in Rochester in a museum, and it's a painting of this prince. It's a prince because you can tell by his attire, long hair blowing in the wind. He's on a horse. The horse's legs are out in both directions, so you know the horse is going really fast. The horse's tail is straight out. All the guy's clothes are straight out behind him. He's standing in the stirrups. He's holding the rein, and he's reaching out. And in front of his hand, just out of his reach, is this crown that he's chasing. Underneath the horse are a bunch of injured people and people being trampled by the horse. He doesn't see any of that. He doesn't see the people underneath him being trampled as he reaches for this crown. And what he nor the horse see is at the edge of the picture, there's a cliff they're both about to go over. It is hard to hold on to a humble position in life, especially if a person is in the public and seen to be somebody. Very hard to do. I'm going to say none of us in this room, myself included, can make ourselves humble. Not a single one of us can make ourselves humble. But we can be humbled. There's no doubt about that. And Moses was humbled here, deeply humbled. Can you imagine? He had to tell the people why. I cannot go into the promise. He explained it to them why I can't go in. God has told me I'm not going in. And this being humbled and the difficulty with it is not just for individuals, it's for churches, for nations. Nations. I mean, look through the scriptures in the Old Testament. How many nations found themselves humbled? How many times was Israel humbled in that way? You see, what Moses did was he allowed himself to be like anybody else here. He was not lifted out. He was just going to be like everybody. I got frustrated and I struck the rock because I was frustrated. And God allowed that sin to work out all of its consequences in Moses' life without holding any of it back. You see, around us right now, there's the world. We all know this as believers. And the world wants people that are really good mixers. It doesn't want people that are good separators at all. Think about what's the biggest single thing in our country right now as an ethic that we would say is the greatest ethic, that generally is seen to be the greatest ethic. It's tolerance. Tolerance. In other words, blend in. Live and let live. Get along and go along. And don't worry about anything about your life. You know, at the time in England, we were talking about this earlier on today. At the time in England when the Puritans came to America, when they left in the 1600s, there was a crime in England. You know what the crime was called? Enthusiasm. That's true. People were put into jail, as it was a Christian country, right? They had the Church of England. You could be put in jail for enthusiasm as a Christian.
They must still believe that.
Not all of them. But what I'm getting at is, if you had enthusiasm as a believer, you stood out. And they didn't like that. Nobody likes that. We don't like that in our country today. Why do you think it is? You can be almost anything except a follower of Jesus in this country. Almost anything. We have the ethos in our country is that of radical equality. Radical equality. Everything's equal. All ideas are equal. Nobody can stand out. But standing out is exactly what God asks us to do. It's exactly what he asks us to do. It's hard not to conform. I mean, it's hard not to blend in. That's the hard road. That's what Jesus kind of talked about when the way is narrow. And we just cannot change our hearts. The one thing that has always, on the one hand, frustrated me as a follower of Jesus, and on the other hand, liberated me is, I see how I'm supposed to be, and I'm not. And it frustrates me, but you know, there's a liberty there as well. I can't change my heart. Can you? I mean, if somebody knows how to do that, man, let's sit down at lunch today and you can explain it to me, because I don't know how to do it. But I know God can change my heart. If we can't come to God with a broken heart, I guarantee you we can come to God and he'll give us a broken heart if we want it. There's one prayer. If somebody came to me and said, Rip, what things would you pray for? I'd say, really, there's only one big thing for me to be praying for when it touches me, and that is that God would change my heart. Change my heart. I remember reading this story about an atheist who was dying. And an atheist all his life, now it's time to die. You know, like all of us, we have to die. And he's laying there in the bed, and his friend, another atheist, comes to visit, because after all, I mean, if you're an atheist and you're dying, you want your friends to come and support you, right? So the friend comes in and says, hang on, brother, to the end. Hang on. And all of a sudden, the atheist who was dying had an insight. God, I guess, gave him an insight. He said, hang on to what exactly am I supposed to hang on to? If there's no God, you and I are just furniture in the universe. That's all we are. We come and we go, just like the armadillos and the bugs and the squirrels and the lizards and everything else. Moses had his heart changed. His heart was changed. How do I know that? After God told Moses that he could not go in, what did Moses do? He continued to serve the people just as he had been. His heart was changed. The fact that he was not going to get his earthly reward didn't stop Moses from continuing to serve the people. He looked ahead. This is what the text says in Hebrews. By faith, Moses left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger, for he persevered as though he could see the one who is invisible. Wow. Now, I want to ask us a question today. Do we live in our lives here on this earth finding all of our comfort in the fact that we're looking for the one who is invisible? Is that really where we are as believers? I mean, let's face it, if you watch TV or you move about in the world today, there are a lot of people who would say to think like that, To look ahead to the one who is invisible is that you're suffering from some kind of delusion. And if you think about it from the standpoint of somebody who's not a believer, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? We can't see God. We can't hear His voice. We've never seen His form, the Scripture says, and yet we believe. Moses was chastised here, but he was always looking ahead to the one who was invisible. Remember Job. Job lost everything. Everything was taken from him. And he wanted to find out from God, why is this happening? Job says this, I had only heard of you, but now I've seen you. That changed everything for Job. It took care of all the questions. He had no more questions. It wasn't that he was embarrassed or anything else. It was that in seeing God, he was satisfied. And here's what I want to, if you don't remember anything about this sermon, which is likely, it's likely. I want you to think about this, if you will. All of us in this room, we've been children at one time, right? We were children, most of us. I'm assuming nobody else showed up like they are right now. And as children, we all had Christmases in our home. Well, Becky and I have had a child. And once you're an adult, Christmas is different. But then when you have children in your home, Christmas becomes exciting again. Why? Well, because let's say you've got a kid, 10, 12 years old, and they're asking for a certain thing. Really want it badly. All year, they want this thing. Maybe the first Christmas they're asking for it, they don't get that thing. But then the parents know the next Christmas coming, there's going to be a box under the tree that says Mom and Dad, and it's going to be that thing they wanted. And so Mom and Dad get it all ready to go and go to bed, and they can't wait. As much as the kid can't wait, Mom and Dad are looking forward to that moment when the kid's going to open the box and that thing that they wanted so badly is waiting there in the box. See, we look at what happened to Moses here as harsh, and I guess it is in a way. But don't you know that God, when He was telling Moses, look, Moses, here's how it's going to be. Go up to the top of the hill, look over and see the land, but sorry, you're not going in. God could do that, and it wasn't harsh, because God, just like a good parent, knew the gift He had waiting for Moses. A much greater gift, a whole lot better promised land than Moses could even imagine was waiting for Moses. God knew that. God knew that, just like a parent knows it on Christmas morning. God knew that He had something a lot better to show Moses. A lot better. He knows the same for us. The same for us. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you want to pray with me, I'll stay here as long as it takes as we close.